Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
Leaders. My name is Adam Oberhausen. I'm the Vice President of Customer Solutions with Right Brain Networks, and I'm your host for today. Joining me today is software and data consultant Tom Kowalski.
Hello.
Hey, Tom. And joining us today is our third co-host and subject matter expert, Matthew Fasciani. Did I get it?
Yeah.
I've been dreading it all week. Matthew, thanks for joining the show. Matthew is a postdoctoral researcher. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, Matthew, and what you do and, you know, kind of how you got into this space of, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. Today we're going to talk about the spread of misinformation and technology's role in that. To me personally, it's been a fascinating subject. I'm no expert, but just with what we saw with the 2016 elections and the QAnon phenomenon and the Pizzagate phenomenon, like these things just truly fascinate me. So I've kind of been, not so much recently, but in recent years past, I'd say I've really followed some of this stuff closely. So to me personally, it's very interesting. And, you know, I've kind of told people that I think the spread of misinformation is one of the biggest threats to our society, from my perspective right now. How about you, Tom? I haven't really talked to you much about my fascination with QAnon, but do you have anything to add with?
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about, you know, AI and how it impacts everything now, especially with the latest stuff with LLMs. So, and I feel like goes hand in hand, right? Just makes it even easier to spread information. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about this with Matthew.
Great. So with that, back to you, Matt. Tell us a little bit about yourself, educational background, what led you to kind of study psychology and sociology. I'd like to start there.
Yeah, so my academic background has been a bit of a journey. If you want to go all the way back, originally I thought I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, and then I did some research doing brain imaging, and I got really interested in neuroscience. So I actually applied for PhD programs in neuroscience and started out doing brain imaging at the University of South Carolina, looking at fMRI research and seeing how, basically putting people in the fMRI scanner and seeing what parts of the brain light up when we give them different tasks. And I thought that was really cool, but I was always interested in bigger, broader societal questions and problems. And I realized that I really wasn't able to study those types of questions in the program I was in. And I was fortunate that I could switch into a sociology PhD at the same university with a focus on social psychology. And I was really interested in beliefs, just how beliefs form, how they impact how we process information. And that was all around 2015, 2016. So before really the rise of Donald Trump and the 2016 election, I was really interested in just how beliefs form and how people can maintain the beliefs that they have and the attitudes that they have, even in the face of contrasting information or contrasting evidence. So I studied political polarization and misinformation during my dissertation time. And then since then, when I graduated in 2020, I graduated right when the pandemic hit, which was not great for a lot of reasons. But it really forced me to focus on health misinformation in particular. So paid a lot of attention to COVID misinformation, vaccine misinformation, and all types of health misinformation more broadly. And I was studying that during my first postdoc which was at Vanderbilt University. So I did a lot of research on health misinformation there. And then now I'm in my second postdoc at the University of Notre Dame. I actually work in a computer science department, and I study media literacy and developing media literacy tools to teach people how to evaluate what's true versus false on the internet. So that's what I'm working on now.
How do you define media literacy?
So media literacy, it's a broad umbrella term that we use. There's all different types of literacies that are more specific. So you can think about news literacy, information literacy, digital literacy. These all look at different components of how we evaluate information. Basically, the broad definitions like being able to critically evaluate media and information that you encounter. When we think about media literacy, the types of techniques that we teach in these little education tools are how to recognize if a source is credible or not, or if something backed up by corroborating evidence, and also just a general awareness of our own biases and how we may be influenced by how we process information and the media we encounter. So yeah, media literacy is basically just a broad set of skills that help us critically evaluate information we see often from media and social media.
So I spent some time reading your papers earlier this week, Matthew, and you did an interesting paper that studied media literacy in the countries of Indonesia and Malaysia.
Yep.
Yeah, and it was really interesting I like the intent of the paper because it was like intentionally not looking at a Western society, right? And can you kind of maybe speak on that a little bit? Like, what's the difference between like analyzing a Western society's media literacy versus a Southeast Asian or Eastern society's media literacy, and what were the key takeaways you saw there?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for the field of media literacy misinformation to go beyond Western audiences. So much of misinformation research and media literacy research, it really is heavily focused on English-speaking countries. And that's because a lot of people doing the research speak English, and it's just easier to do research in a language that you're familiar with. So it's really skewed towards countries like the United States and the UK and Australia. It's like a lot of the research is just focused on those countries. But the information environments are very different in different parts of the world. So, for example, Southeast Asia, Indonesia specifically is a country we've been focusing on the past year or so. And we are interested in Indonesia for a few different reasons. One is it's a huge country. It's the fourth largest country in the world by population. And yet there's very little work looking at media literacy tools or education strategies or just the misinformation landscape. And so there's this whole like dearth of research on that country that's so big. And another thing that's interesting about it is it's a relatively new digital arrival. So the country has more recently gotten a whole bunch more internet access compared to other industrialized countries. And then also it's a relatively new democracy that really is just got a democratic process in store like in 1999 or so. So in the last 20 years. So it's kind of this interesting country to study for the structure of how the country is, but also the social media platforms that they use. So for example, one of the biggest social media platforms in Indonesia is WhatsApp. Like they use that to communicate with their friends and family, but also share news and current events. Whereas in the United States, a lot of people don't really use WhatsApp all that much. And if they do, it's maybe just like a niche messaging app. Mm-hmm. So what we also have done is develop this game that looks like WhatsApp. And as you're playing the game, it teaches you how to identify sources of misinformation and credibly evaluate different sources in the game. So the game, it's like a simulation of your friends and family messaging you, and they're sharing a fake story about like one example is this tiger running around Jakarta. And whenever you see that, you have an opportunity to respond. Like they ask you in the game if you think this is true or false. And you can see that like the picture looks like it's in the jungle and it's from this source that doesn't look very credible. So you can say like, no, I don't think this is accurate. And then the game would tell you like, yes, this is the correct response because, the image didn't look like it was even in the city and it was from like this random blog post, not a credible news source. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but basically we because of the information environments and the social media platforms that people use, we've been trying to tailor the interventions, these educational interventions, to Indonesian audiences. And so far, we found pretty encouraging results that they do seem to help.
And what I know you're still kind of actively studying this in Eastern societies, but like, what are some commonalities of what you see with the English-speaking countries what are the commonalities and differences that you see? Like, is it radically different of how they, other than like you said, they choose WhatsApp versus over here, maybe we're using Facebook, but like, I mean, do you see similar patterns of like, this is how a society that is, radically different than, the United States, they still have very similar problems when it comes to the spread of misinformation, or do you see very different problems?
Yeah, so there's definitely different topics that pop up, but there's a lot of similarities. So like COVID misinformation was really big in Southeast Asia as it was in the United States. One big difference is the political environments. So in the United States, there's a very simple and easy Democrat versus Republican political slant. So it's really straightforward to categorize those two groups and see how one might be biased in one direction or the other. In Indonesia, there's various political coalitions that are much more fluid, and it's not as clear-cut as like this person's on this side and this person's on the other side. So there's a lot more fluidity in trying to understand the political biases and political misinformation. Of course, there's still tons of political misinformation in that country and all countries really, but it's not as like very clear in these two distinct groups like it is in the US.
That's interesting.
But as far as like general tendencies, we see the general tendencies of confirmation bias and this motivation to adhere to ideologies that people have and then interpret information in a way that's consistent with those ideologies. So, and then that's reinforced by social media and the networks we have. So like those general principles happen everywhere. It's just there's maybe different infrastructures that sustain them.
Okay, I want to try to frame this conversation a little. Try to frame it in the terms of the technology. You've mentioned social media several times in our talk already. Like, are the social media platforms kind of the front runner of tools that are spreading misinformation, or am I even thinking about it not in the correct way? Like, I know we have things like Twitter, Facebook. Kind of wondering, like, from your perspective, like, what are the specific technologies that exacerbate the spread of misinformation? Then, like, how do you and your colleagues like propose that we combat or educate folks to recognize and not fall victim to misinformation?
Yeah, so how I think about it is social media makes it a lot more efficient to fall prey to these biases that we have. So generally, big picture, we have this bias to maintain consistency between the important identities that we have and the information we encounter. So if we have a political identity, that's an easy way to think about it. Okay, we're motivated to believe things that fit within our political ideology and identity. And then social media makes it really easy to just find people who agree with us and then get social support for that identity. And then not only are you bolstering your own identity, but other people are getting support in a mutual verification process. So like you're supporting your identity, you share something online, other people see it, they have the same identity, they reshare it and like it. And it's just kind of this feedback loop of people who fall into, we can call them echo chambers or filter bubbles, or this idea of these tight networks of social media groups that share the same information and reinforce each other. And importantly, this happens outside of social media as well. It's just like a human tendency that we have. But social media makes it really easy to do that. So as far as the issue with social media, it's like it exacerbates these human tendencies. It's not causing misinformation out of nowhere. Like, people have these motivations already. It just facilitates it. As far as then trying to fix it, it gets really challenging on diving into these types of questions. There's a few general principles I think it would be helpful for social media. One is definitely working more with independent researchers when they study their platforms and their data. A lot of it's still kind of hard to really get the data and kind of understand what's going on. So old Twitter used to be pretty good at this, that you could access a lot of the data and study what's happening. But with new Twitter, now X, it's really expensive to have access to the data. So it's not very transparent what's going on. So that's like the first step, is ideally we'd have transparency in these social media platforms and try to understand how they work. In addition to that, I think one thing that would be helpful is to try to think about the amount of friction involved in how viral different posts spread. So we know that false and misleading information tends to be shared way more rapidly than true and nuanced information. Unsurprisingly, if you post something more sensationalist or emotional, it really can go viral really quickly. And some people have proposed, like, okay, instead of trying to moderate the types of information that spread, if we just kind of turn the dial down on overall virality, it will reduce the spread of some of these worst misinformation and sensationalized news out there. So just trying to think about the algorithms themselves and how they reward sensationalist content. If we just kind of dial that down a little bit, that could be helpful. So that avoids a lot of the discussion of like deciding on what types of information to moderate if we just kind of collectively reduce it. So those are a couple ideas that could help, but it's really challenging.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that, you think, social media having access to all these different ideas and information all around the world, but, it kind of, like you said, allows you to find those niche groups and, kind of form those echo chambers. And it's like the algorithms, whether they're not, they don't want to make this happen, but they want more engagement, and it ends up, happening. You're engaged more with people that say the same things that, you believe in. So, yeah, so it's challenging. How would you propose that they, these changes, right, to the algorithm, less sensational, would be, what's the motivation for like the social media companies to do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately,
Yeah.
ultimately the big issue is like, well, ultimately you're asking them to reduce their profits by some amount. And that's, there's so many great people at these social media companies that understand the problem. But it seems like the people at the very top have a motivation to protect the bottom line. And that's how they view it, is like, there's all these trust and safety people that are like, yeah, we can like play around with the algorithms, make things more safe, more, less awful for people to, less misinformation, less extreme content. Ultimately, you're still making a decision like, okay, we're going to get people to be on our platforms less if we make these changes. And that's like, it's really tough because like Instagram could easily, for example, there's been some people have proposed that whenever you're scrolling, if you're scrolling for too long, like after, let's say, a couple hours, if you're still scrolling on Instagram, then your scrolling starts to gradually be slower and slower. So you just get frustrated because you can't scroll as quickly, and then you put the app down. But again, like, what's the motivation for Instagram or any social media company to get people off of their platform?
Yeah.
I mean, it's ultimately it's an economic issue where it's like, okay, we have some ideas that could help a little bit, but it's fighting against some of those economic incentives.
Yeah. So good segue to a question I had on my list was, I mean, you're right, Matthew and Tom, like when there's money involved, they're not going to do the right thing for society. They might try some things, but they're never gonna. So then what role should policymakers have in this addressing the spread of misinformation, whether it's regulating social media or other things that I probably haven't even thought of? Like, do you see policymakers having a big role in this ultimately, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky with policy. I mean, the things that we know that work are these media literacy education type of tools and strategies. So, one easy thing is like fund education, fund media literacy programs. Yeah. Right. So like it's that, like everything's so difficult from a policy perspective. There's all these nuances and challenges within the political structure of our government. But, that's at least something that we know works, is if you teach people these skills, they're better able to recognize true and false things on the internet. So like we at least know that can work. And if we can scale that, that's kind of the issue. That's why we work on making these little games, because they're so easy to teach people. People can just spread it within their networks or on social media and then play a 5-minute game and learn how to identify information more critically on the internet. So that's one thing, is like try to promote anything that is promoting media literacy, information literacy. And again, like hopefully that would be nonpartisan. Like everyone should want that, because we're not even diving into different types of content. It's just teaching people how to recognize information better. So, I mean, that's one thing. I mean, I think transparency of social media companies is something that could be, you're not asking them to necessarily change their algorithms or how they work things, but if we could at least have more independent researchers getting access to the data, then we could have a better understanding of what exactly is going on. So that's something policymakers could try to address. And just generally, I think it's really important for academic researchers, people in industry, and policymakers to all work together on a lot of these topics. A lot of times we're in our own silos. And I think, especially when it comes to technology, when it has such a big impact on so many people, if we have lots of different people working together and trying to approach these problems collectively, I think that's definitely be a good thing too.
I recall in some of your work I read earlier this week where you talk about the role of fact checkers, and there's various sites that do fact checking, and there's sometimes you see when Twitter used to be Twitter, there would be like the misinformation label or whatever COVID misinformation. Is putting things like that on Facebook and X that, hey, this is in fact incorrect or false? It seems to backfire, right? I don't know. Is it effective to do that? Because then people question who are the fact checkers, and the fact checkers are just a bunch of leftist academics who are telling us what to think. It just seems like it's a catch-22 with some of these tools. So yeah, I just kind of, what's your take on the fact checking as a service for combating misinformation?
Yeah, no, great question. So the short answer is yes, it does work. It is effective. Like whenever we look at the overall big picture, big studies, just when you have a big group of people, you show them information with fact checks, it helps. So on the margins, that's good. It's a good thing.
That's good.
Yeah. So that's the encouraging thing, is big picture, looking at population level, does it have any kind of effect? Yes, it has a positive effect, even if it's, small overall, a couple percentage points can make a big difference when we're thinking about, millions and millions of people. But you're right, there is going to be a subset of the population that rejects it and in fact can have more negative attitudes towards it if they see the label. So I think it's generally still a good thing to have. Generally, people who see these labels are going to be more accurate in their beliefs after they see them, but there is going to be a subset of population that just rejects it. So it is challenging to reach the people who need it most, but there are still a lot of people in the middle who honestly do benefit from seeing the information and don't have particularly strong emotions to the content they're seeing.
Tom, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Oh, no, not on that. Well, I do want to get into the role of AI in all of this.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's the good segue or not, but
Yeah.
but yeah, I'd love to know, your thoughts on, how AI is, maybe exacerbating or maybe helping or the different effects, right, with these new LLMs coming out. And just want to get your take on that and how that you think it's affecting the misinformation.
Yeah, great question as well. So AI can help in a few different ways. So one thing with fact checking is, as I mentioned before, with reaching different populations that are not English speaking, one really great thing is like it can help with translation really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So you can immediately translate a fact check into a bunch of different languages and then share that with a bunch of different people. Whereas otherwise it'd be a lot slower with a lot of the previous tools. So just getting more good information to more people is one way that AI can really help automating that process, automating, some of the background, like preliminary steps in fact checking. Just as AI can help with a lot of different tools and tasks that we have, it can also help with some of the steps for fact checking. Of course, the ideal is still having humans double check the fact checks and work with fact checking. I don't think we're at a point anywhere close where we can just have a AI fact check all by itself and be completely accurate. So that's one way that it can help. Another thing it can help is detecting doctored images and changed images. So that's something that we work at. My colleagues and I, we are working on these projects where we try to use AI to detect if an image has been changed. So identify the original image and then see if someone changed it and then track it as it spreads on social media. And we're specifically looking at Southeast Asia again. And basically we can see like if someone changes a picture of a political leader and like adds them doing something that might be bad or makes them look bad, or adds another person that standing next to them, be like, oh, they met with this person even though they didn't actually meet with them. Mm-hmm. We can track that really easily and be like, here's the original source, here's the original picture. They weren't next to this person. The picture that you're seeing spread is the false one. And those types of tools are really useful, is really, fighting these AI doctored images with AI. So it's kind of like an arms race of having people use the AI to make up things that are not true, and then also using AI to identify the true and original image. So those are some of the things that AI can do. Another thing that's pretty new that a few researchers have been looking at is using AI chatbots to teach media literacy, critical thinking, general education skills to help people discern true versus false on the internet. So again, like I mentioned, making these little games that people can play that are effective. But another step in addition to that is actually having people interact with chatbots where they can ask questions to the chatbot and ask like why this thing is true or false. So you can feed in information to the chatbot where the LLM is taught like how to recognize true versus false. And we have all these evidence-based strategies for fact checking. And then a person can interact with this chatbot and learn strategies themselves and maybe learn about a particular topic. There's one study that just came out where people who believed conspiracy theories interacted with an AI chatbot over, I think, 3 different discussions. And the chatbot was just programmed to like provide evidence or point out where there's lack of evidence in their beliefs. And it did show a significant reduction for most of the people in this study. So just having 3, I think, interactions with this chatbot where it pointed out very specifically, hey, this is the limitations in the theory you're proposing, did find that, at least in that group of people, it reduced the strength of their beliefs in these different conspiracies. So, there's all these negatives that come with AI, like flooding the zone with bad information, low quality information, but there are some positives too.
Yeah, that's exciting. I only think of the bad things, right, that could happen. So It's exciting that there's a lot of good that can come from these new LLMs and being able to detect misinformation and help others. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's like as Matt was going off there, talking about those different use cases, it's like there's a polar opposite to everything where someone can be using it for bad, but you kind of framed it, Matt, where like for every bad use case, there's other people that are hopefully using AI for a good use case, and hopefully people that are, ultimately hopefully people using the technology for good can suppress those trying to use it for bad. I mean, with an election year this year, Matt, like what has you on high alert, or like what is some interesting things that you follow in an election year in the U.S.? Is there anything particular that you're seeing that is of fascination with you, or that you're studying at the moment, or are you still kind of just focused mostly on the Southeast Asia stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely still pay attention to a lot of domestic issues. Unfortunately, a lot of it's what we've already seen. So there's a few different things. Like one, there's still like this influx of bots and troll accounts that try to spread, disinformation, like purposeful, misleading content here. Some of the good news, kind of on a tangent, like we now have some data looking at these disinformation campaigns from like 2016, for example. And their effects are pretty marginal, some of this data suggests. And that's because like a lot of these political attitudes are already pretty strongly formed. And, seeing a couple bot accounts like reshare a meme or post a meme doesn't actually push people too much to like change their opinion. But unfortunately, because the election is so close and so contested that, even if it pushes a fraction of a percent, that could still make a significant difference. But I do think it's important to highlight that some of these disinformation campaigns are not as effective as maybe some people thought they were. But they still exist. There's still troll farms. AI makes it really easy to flood the zone with bad information, like I said. I mean, that's something that I worry about, is like the personalization of misinformation. People, instead of just having like I said, like these memes or just these weird fake posts that try to incite unrest between different groups, AI might personalize it in a way that resonates specifically with people more strongly. So if you are have a certain if the AI determines your characteristics from your social media profile, like different demographics you fall into, they might be able to better personalize the disinformation they show you that's more effective. And there was some work, if you are familiar with like the Cambridge Analytical, that whole thing, Cambridge Analytica, where they micro-targeted people. So that was the demographic information, or was it like that personality quiz that people took on Facebook and like collected all this information about them, and then they tried to target ads, political ads based on that information. And again, the actual impact of that might not have been as bad as we thought, but I worry it's only going to get more sophisticated. And as we get more data on people, the people who want to spread disinformation and propaganda are just going to be more sophisticated and have a stronger impact. So that's what I worry about, is like, okay, it's like before, like there's going to be all this bad information. A lot of it's just going to be ignored. But as it gets better, it could reach people. And more broadly, I think the thing that I worry about too is this growing lack of trust in institutions and in the media and in just experts in general, as AI makes it so easy to fake things and sow doubt in information. There's going to be even more of a decline in trust of information more broadly. So even if it doesn't make people necessarily believe false information, it might just make them more distrustful of everything.
Oh yeah, I'm already at the point where I see a photo, it's like, I don't know if I can trust this. I can trust the source, right? If I know if it's from a trusted source, or if the video, video deep fakes are already out there, and you just, you have to, it's all going to be about the trusting the source it comes from. You see some random video on X or some other social media platform, you don't know how it's been doctored or where it came from. If you're able to, when we talk about these groups or individuals who are, behind the curtain spreading the misinformation, are we talking about state actors? Are we talking about domestic actors? I'm sure it's a blend, like with all things, but like, is there anything? Can you help educate me on who is propagating all this misinformation, and then what are their core motivations for doing so?
Yeah, so it is all the above. Unfortunately, there is a lot of state actors, and we can try to track this again using technology and AI, like these troll farms. We can try to track generally like what time. Like one funny thing to track these troll farms is a lot of times they're run by humans that have these fake accounts, these fake social media accounts, and they follow like a 9 to 5 schedule with a lunch break, depending on like what country they're living in. And you can kind of follow, depending on the time zone of the country we think it's coming from. They have this very scheduled 9 to 5 with a lunch break in their posting activity. So yeah, there's a lot of state actor disinformation basically everywhere, unfortunately. Different countries have different interests. China, Indonesia, like all these, Russia, all of these countries have an interest in their, promoting their government, making other governments, producing distrust in other governments from other countries. And it's really, really complicated and messy because, they're fighting with each other. Yeah, so I don't know if that's super helpful, but it does exist, absolutely. And it's really hard because, you're then, you're talking about, okay, like misinformation, how do we teach people these skills to recognize it? But then you're up against like these huge government machines that have really strong motivations, different political parties. We see this just, even if it's not anything like behind the scenes, just overt propaganda from different political groups that are, spreading a misleading message to a lot of people to try to get people on their side or, attack the other group with some misleading information. I mean, this has been happening long before social media, just how political groups are biased to attack other political groups. And then, of course, there's individuals who do profit a lot from spreading misinformation, or even there's people who get an audience who crave this specific type of information. And it's this idea of like audience capture where, okay, like maybe they were even like not that extreme before they started monetizing their content. And then they get a newsletter where people want to see these types of narratives and misinformation spread. So they kind of have to continue promoting those types of narratives to their followers. So yeah, it's really from all angles. It's really overwhelming just to think about the sources of misinformation.
Yeah, it sounds like I would put QAnon in that last part you talked about, where it's just like, I mean, we think we know who was behind it all. It just was like a guy who was just like posting on 4chan and growing an audience, and he probably just became addicted to that feeling of controlling, a portion of the population. And it's just wild to me that it kind of grew to the point where it did. And, I think it still exists today. I don't think it's at the level it was leading into the 2016 elections and beyond. But, man, pretty scary phenomenon when you think about that. And I guess, what is it that, so you've studied beliefs your whole, as your career here, like how do these beliefs come to fruition in an individual? Like, what is the core makings of a belief that fosters this type of belief in something that's not real?
Yeah. So how I think about it is, again, we can think about these identities that we have. Like, we all have thousands of different identities. Like, someone who's like your family identities. If you like a sports team, your fan identity, your job identity, like all these different identities provide us with meaning and also a source of self-esteem for how we navigate our lives. So, if we do a good job at work, it makes us feel good because we care about the worker identity that we have, for example, or for a parent and raising our children, that can make us feel good to see our children do well. But those identities can also be political identities, or, an identity that's for QAnon. Maybe you think that you have secret or special forbidden knowledge that other people don't have. That makes you feel good. It's a source of self-esteem. So ultimately, how I think about it is people can latch on to these identities that are rooted in misinformation, but to them, it provides community, one, with other people who they bond with, and two, the psychological benefits of feeling like you are special, have this self-esteem, like I have that special knowledge. Like for QAnon, for example, it's I have this secret knowledge other people don't have. I'm smart. I know all these things, and this is important. It makes me feel good, ultimately. And I have all these people I can talk to that are my friends, or makes me feel connected. So there's these huge social and psychological benefits to these beliefs associated with these identities. So the way that I think about it is it's very rational in a sense to keep up these beliefs in false information, because what you're doing is like, okay, I get all this positive psychological feedback and support from maintaining this belief. I get all these friends and social support from this belief. And for my day-to-day life, it really doesn't impact me all that much. So, if you believe the earth is flat, like your day-to-day life really isn't going to change all that much if that's true or false, right? Like unless you're a pilot or something, you're not really interacting with the edges of the earth. But if all your friends and psychological support is from this belief, it makes you feel good, and your friends share that belief and you go hang out with them and stuff, then if you change your beliefs and lose all of that, that's a direct negative results that you do experience in your day-to-day life. So why people have these beliefs is you have to understand the meaning it gives them. And ultimately, if they could derive their self-esteem from a more diverse group of identities and have healthier communities that can support them, that would allow them to maybe transition into not falling for something that's untrue.
Thank you. That's very helpful and insightful. We're getting close to time. I have two more questions I want to ask you, Matt. Number one, for people listening today or listening to the podcast later, what can people do? What can individuals do today to improve their media literacy and better identify false information? Like you've mentioned the games and the apps, and like where can we go to get that stuff and get better at media literacy today?
Yeah, there are a lot of really great organizations that share different tips for media literacy. Let's see, I think one is called News Literacy Project, I believe is one that I follow. But so that's a good one. Let's see, just Pointer Institute. They have a lot of really great tips that are evidence-based. So if you want to go to websites, those are a couple nonpartisan websites that are pretty good. Generally one or two quick tips I could give for fact checking in general is what's called lateral reading. So instead of looking vertically within an article, trying to fact check the article for what is said within it, you look at what other people have said about things referenced in the article. So if it's from a particular news organization, you can open another tab, go laterally, and think and read about what other people have said about that source or about that writer. Are they biased? Are they transparent? Do they, they share when they got things wrong in the past? And you can look up those types of things across. So basically you're checking it through a variety of sources instead of just looking within that one source. So that's one quick thing that people could do. And then another thing is a really easy, simple thing, but for social media, if something really creates a lot of emotion in us, I think that's a good indicator to kind of pause and reflect if it's real or not, because a lot of times when something evokes emotion, it's meant to evoke a reaction in us, and maybe it's misleading or not 100% the truth. And then we can kind of reflect on, is this real? Is this biased? Is this sensationalized? Even if it's something we agree with, maybe it's not 100% true. So those are a couple quick tips. I talk a lot about different media literacy tips online. So I'm on Threads is actually the social media that I use most. So I talk a lot about misinformation and media literacy on there. But yeah, I think collectively, if we all make an effort to be more careful about how we interact with our social media, I think it would be helpful.
Great. My last question I have for you is any upcoming projects or collaborations you're excited about that you'd want to share with us that we could maybe follow once you publish some results, or just, maybe, speak on what you're working on.
Yeah, so the game that I mentioned, we hopefully will be having that published in the next couple weeks. We got some good initial feedback from reviewers, so I'm going to publish that paper talking about that media literacy game for an Indonesian audience. Other projects I'm looking at is basically how people interact with chatbots, like what components of the output impact trust. So if people see sources, does that increase the trust in the answer? Well, what does the source look like that could increase trust? So thinking about that. So not just using chatbots to teach people, but also thinking about what components of chatbots facilitate trust. And then the last thing that's coming out hopefully by the end of this year is my book. So I do have a book coming out that talks basically all about what we discussed today. It's called Misguided. It's all about why we believe misinformation and what we can do about it. And I'll definitely be sharing that whenever it's out. So hopefully by the end of this year, I do have a newsletter on my website if people are interested in following that, and I'll definitely post an update when I have the specific date.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. I was going to bring up the book, but then I saw on your website it was announced like in 2021, and I was like, okay, maybe something happened. So I'm glad to hear that this book is coming out. Congratulations. Thank you so much. This is a really interesting talk. I feel like I've learned something, and appreciate you taking some time out of your day to come join us on Lunch with Tech Leaders. And Tom, any final thoughts just to say goodbye to Matt? And
yeah, no, thank you. And if there's another project, I think a browser extension would be great. You're talking about open another tab laterally. I don't know if ones exist or whatever, but I feel like that'd be really helpful. That just works for all the sites, right? Kind of reads it over, just gives me like a little indicator, what I'm scrolling through.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So with that, thank you everyone for joining. Take this opportunity to thank our listeners for listening to today's episode. We hope you found the conversation informative and valuable. We'd love to have you join us again for the next episode. We're going to be discussing the rise of Cloudflare and its edge computing capabilities with Tom Kowalski. And then we're going to have another one in June where Travis Walker is going to do another interview of an interesting person in technology. So appreciate everyone joining us, and everyone have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.